DDC, go ahead and help us to introduce yourself. The president has made an introductory remark.
Unmute yourself.
We can hear you. Wait, you're good now. You're good.
Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me. Mr. President, can you hear me, sir?
I do.
We can hear you clearly.
We are having some technical difficulties, so when you were talking, I was busy with the technician trying to engage so that we can resolve it, and thank God, I think we have resolved it. And thank you once more, Mr. President. Welcome to this the interview. It's a show where we go into in-depth conversation about very critical issues of our liberation movement. The PS is making some signs. I don't know if... Are we okay? Are we good to go?
Yes, sir.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this edition. Once more, the president of the Ambazonian Governing Council, we are privileged to have Dr. Cho Ayaba, the leader of our War of Liberation, the commander-in-chief of the Ambazonian Defense Forces, here with us today. And he has already started to rule out the big program we have for our country to go deep into our history, as we will be looking on this topic that have a three angle. One is about the TPS that have been granted by the United States to the people of the Cameroons. That means the Ambazonians and the Cameroonians who also are facing some difficulties with the fight against Boko Haram. That country is unstable, and due to our war, the Ambazonian people have championed this cause, and we have that today. We are also going to go into the war, Russia war against Ukraine, and to see what impact that war has had on the Ambazonian liberation movement. And we are also going to talk about some other issues that will relate with us with this topic. So, Mr. Press Secretary, would you want to say something, or should I dive in the introduction to the content of this topic?
Let's go into the content.
Ladies and gentlemen, to give you a little bit of background for our people the way they did for Ground Zero, make una understand the history. There is a lot of similarity between the story of Ambazonia and that of Ukraine. Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, and in 1991, Ukraine got its independence when the Soviet Union split into several countries, and it became a sovereign state. The Russian Federation also became a sovereign state. The Russian Federation maintained the seat of the United Nations Security Council that was held by the Soviet Union. So Russia somehow become like the mother of the Soviet state. So the Russian Federation is regarded as the leftover of the Soviet state. And there is always this hanging air in Russia that Ukraine is somehow was part of Russia, but actually Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Almost a similar thing with Cameroon and Ambazonia. We used to be part of a former German Cameroon that was split after the loss of the Second World War. In 2014, that is when we have this new crisis in Ukraine that have turned out into full-blown war between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. In 2014, there was what they call the Ukrainian Revolution, where the people of Ukraine, they rose up against this system that was in place that for the most part was being sponsored by the Russian Federation. There were a lot of political parties that received money from Russia and were paying allegiance to the Russian state. But in 2014, the people of Ukraine, they rose up to demand more democracy, and they overthrew the government of Viktor Yanukovych. That triggered the Russian invasion of annexation of Crimea, and eventually declaration that Crimea is a part of Russia. The Russian Federation also supported separatist group in Donetsk and Luhansk, who have today declared themselves Republic of Donetsk and Republic of Luhansk. So we are in a situation where Russia have fully invaded a sovereign European state, Ukraine, with the pretext that they want to protect Ukraine, the people in Luhansk and Donetsk. And just 24 hours ago, the general who is in charge of the war, the new general, have announced the objective of the Russian Federation, which is to completely take control of south of Ukraine, including Moldova, which is not even a part of Ukraine. So that is where we are today. It has brought into question the whole concept of the United Nations, the Security Council. President Zelensky said that it should be dissolved if they are incapable of resolving problems like these. Mr. President, what is your take of this happening in Ukraine, and how does it reflect to the conflict we have today with Cameroon currently occupying and have recolonized Ambazonian sovereign territory?
Thanks a lot, DDC, for that very rich background information. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is a crisis between territorial integrity and state sovereignty and that of national security. That is simply the baseline. It may be a mask for a kind of a utopian mindset about the former Soviet Union, but basically, within the context of international relations, it is seen as a crisis of the maintenance of a key concept of international security, which is that of territorial integrity and sovereignty versus national security. Now, Ukraine is a sovereign state with its international borders clearly demarcated, and so too is the Russian Federation. But Ukraine's proximity to Russia is something that, and its democratic credentials, its willingness to become part of Western economic and military system has been posing some threat to the Russian Federation. And I want to give a very balanced perspective so that we have a clear understanding. I know that in every conflict around the world, our premise of analysis or our analytical framework has been defined by the Cold War divide. Who is for the West and who is for the East? That holds true even for the Ambazonian struggle for liberation. I have avoided deliberately to make the Ambazonian struggle for independence a kind of a global jihad for Africa or an anti-France struggle. And so you've gotten calls where people say this is a fight against France, not against Cameroon. Cameroon is simply an implant. That has been the way most struggles, anti-colonial struggles, have been defined between the colonized and not the puppets, but with the colonial state or the driving colonial state. So in analyzing the Ukrainian conflict, that between Russia and Ukraine, most people, most Ambazonians are looking at it through the lens of a struggle between Western liberal economic and political system against, the Eastern system. That's a struggle between Russia and America, and we've missed the point. We've missed the importance of Ukraine as a state, Ukrainians as people with the right to exist within a defined territory. So once more back to the premise is that Ukraine has had since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Don't forget, the Soviet Union was a stitched together, massive political space, mostly brought about through cohesion and political and economic ideology that was spread through these places. And in 1989, and that held true for us too in Ambazonia, the Berlin Wall came crumbling down, and that began the gradual, what I call, unthawing of the Soviet Union. breakdown of the Soviet Union into constituent states, many of them Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and others. And this has led to independent states within the Soviet Union joining become part of the European Union or the European free market. Russia has not really been worried, though it has been troubled by the expansion to the east by NATO and the European Union. For Russia, the red line was somehow Ukraine. And it managed, as the DDC pointed out, to be able to use the Russian components within Ukraine to drive the political agenda of Ukraine, getting persons from the Russian-speaking side in Ukraine to become the president of the state, and using that kind of a puppeteering system to be able to ensure that Ukraine remains a part of the Russian bloc, even without an accord in politics and in economics and in military. But the uprising unraveled that particular agenda in keeping Ukraine under the hands of the kind of a Russian proxy. And that led also to Russia moving into the next phase of what they call national security, creating buffers between the mainland and the Russian state by moving into the Luhansk, Donetsk areas and ensuring that using the argument, which basically, and I don't want to make this comparison to see Russia as a Nazi Germany, but it's the same kind of argument Hitler used in what they call Sudetenland, I think in Poland, making the argument that the German-speaking population was marginalized or was being maltreated. And so Russia still used that same argument to be able to expand its own territorial integrity within the territory of Ukraine, but carving out these enclaves and giving them kind of full independence. Though not recognized by the international community or the United Nations, Russia basically recognized those places. You may then argue that if there were crimes being committed by Ukraine within these Russian-speaking areas, do these people have a right to self-determination? Yes, but were the arguments put forth by Russia really justified? Of course, everybody understands that these enclaves were being carved out to provide what I call a security buffer between the mainland of Ukraine and Russia. And Russia has also invoked what I have talked about previously as the Monroe Doctrine, to justify its actions in Ukraine, or to justify its call for security guarantee for its own self-preservation. Because that's the same doctrine the United States invoked when Russia put in missiles in Cuba. I think we are all aware, those who study history, I think even in primary school, we learned about the Cuban Missile Crisis. So when Russia put in missiles in Cuba, the United States basically said, Cuba is part of the Western Hemisphere, and any encroachment by the Russians will be a threat to United States national security. The United States has also argued basically that there will be no colonialism. So if the Europeans are moving into Africa or elsewhere and doing colonialism, the Western Hemisphere, Canada, Mexico, and others will be out of that of their reach, which is now famously known as the Monroe Doctrine. The United States basically made Russia to remove those missiles. And though we understand, because we see international relations only through the lens of United States victory, but we now know from the superficial history we learned that was in exchange for United States removing its missiles from, I think, Nicosia. Idris, you correct me if I'm wrong there. So they struck a deal where the United States put out some missiles from Nicosia, and the Russians removed their missiles from Cuba. So Russia is using the same Monroe Doctrine to argue that Ukraine's entry into the European Union and Ukraine's entry into NATO is a threat to its own national security, because that basically put Russia at the border of NATO. Is it a valid argument? If you look at the map of the United States, you will realize that there is part of the United States that was bought from Russia. I think that should be Alaska. And so the border between the United States and Russia is not as wide as we think. We see Russia within Europe and Asia, but they share a kind of they are not quite far apart. So is the argument that an encroachment into Ukraine puts NATO and the EU at the border of Russia any justification, any threat to Russian security? If you look at it from the perspective of the Monroe Doctrine, yes, it is a threat to Russian security. It is a humiliation. Why? Because the Soviet Union was defeated. It disintegrated into its constituent parts, which have all become members of the European Union. And that was enough humiliation for Russia. And to grab Ukraine and put Russia at the exact doorstep of NATO is for a perceived superpower or an earlier superpower that from the multipolar world, and that is its emergence at this particular state is trying to challenge kind of the unipolarity of the world's order. It's a humiliation. So now,
so Mr. President,
let me just conclude. Let me just conclude this. Is it then justified to roll tanks across the border of a sovereign state because of a threat to your own national security? Is any preemption justified in the absence of any direct evidence of provocation or incursion into your territory? No. The international order has been maintained in the last 50 or 70 years by the respect of territorial integrity. But is it the first time also we think territorial integrity is being violated? And that fits into the argument of those who simply see the world through the lens of Russia versus America. And so you can count the number of states whose sovereignty has been violated by the United States and say, because of that, there is justification for Russia. Absolutely not. Because there was no justification for the United States, except you violate that when there is a national threat to your own security, an incursion, or there is an ongoing genocide that threatens international peace and security, which you can then use the UN Charter to go in. Can, in the 21st century, in the full glare of the media, another country roll its tanks across the border, bomb cities, murder people in the name of a threat? No. This is the biggest mistake Russia has made in modern times. It's a huge fundamental error, especially for a country that was rising using proxies to prop up its own power and using that proxy to undermine United States hegemony. It is used that effectively in Afghanistan. It's used that effectively in Yemen. It's using Iran as a proxy to be able to do its stuff. We use that in Syria. It's using that in Central African Republic. It's using that in Mali. It's using that in different parts of the world successfully. Why will it give the United States a battlefield to humiliate it? Why will it roll tanks to violate the sovereignty of an independent state? Why will it roll tanks to violate the territorial integrity of an independent state? Should Ukraine not have the right as an independent state to decide to join NATO or to join the European Union? The general answer is yes, but sometimes it's also not yes.
Yeah, but that's why, Mr. President, Mr. President, the general answer, as you've said, that's why we are here to explore and dissect the different interpretations, the different opinions, and what different people think about this situation and how that applies to the Ambazonian conflict. So let's bring in the DDC. DDC, can you chip in based on some of the questions the president has asked?
Yes, I think the same narrative that you have explained to our audience, it is similar politics that was going on when the Southern Cameroon was about to have her independence, and the whole political architecture that have safeguarded international security that was formed after the Second World War in 1939, with the creation of the United Nations. That we fought. Your father fought in that war, which is something I want us to go into in a little while. But when you look at the politics of the day, when Southern Cameroon was about to have her independence, with the French government sitting in Yaoundé publishing messages of Southern Cameroon having links with Kwame Nkrumah, who was visiting Vietnam and trying to play the British people to scare them. And he was saying, look at what Cuba was doing to the United States. Just imagine what Southern Cameroon aligning itself with Russia is going to do to Britain. And the French government got away with it with the help of the church conspiracy in bringing the French Cameroon francophone citizen to become the next prime minister of Southern Cameroon, and eventually they took over Southern Cameroon, even with the vote of they trick us into the plebiscite in a vote in the United Nations General Assembly where Cameroon voted against our clear established right of self-determination. They still successfully annex us, recolonize us. It all began with the same type of Monroe idea thinking of the day, where superpower think that there is some type of a risk of smaller countries aligning themselves ideologically with other big countries. And how do you see the similarities between the thinking of the day during Southern Cameroon's debate of independence in the United Nations and the conspiracy between France and the UK, similar to what Russia is doing today?
It's the same and archaic, mundane, trivial, and unacceptable, right? And that's what I said. You see, during the discussions about our independence, the world was seen only through the lens of stability with the West or instability with the East. And so we became a victim of that conspiracy. And that victimization also stemmed from the fact that our benevolence in granting asylum to Cameroonians who had escaped the brutal war against nationalist forces that were being supported by Ghana. Then Ghana was seen as pivoting towards the East, or was part of perceived as the communist sphere of influence. And so when the Philipson Commission to determine our economic viability rendered its report on whether Ambazonia after independence will become viable, that commission basically said, no, will not become viable. And the British said, all right, lack of viability, we are not interested in maintaining some form of indirect rule. And leaving us alone will mean that with having so many of these communists within Ambazonia, we would pivot to Russia. No one ever thought of Ambazonia, that we are a state. Even our own leaders then, while Foncha was pivoting towards Cameroon, Ndele was pivoting towards Nigeria. So it's the same argument. Sovereign independence today, even in liberation struggles, and it's a big problem. And even in liberation struggles, people fighting for their freedom are never seen as being capable of undermining and overthrowing existing tyranny if they are not supported by one of the two ideological divides. And Ambazonia is today in our struggle, we have a unique case where we are able to say we are not going to look at the Ukrainian conflict through the lens of the East-West divide, but we are going to look at it from the perspective that Ukraine as a state has a right to its own choices, as long as it does not use those choices to directly affect Russia's national security or its territorial integrity. So I agree with you that the posture of the world has to change, and it will not change by us using the template in our argument of a bipolar world between between Russia and the United States.
So I I agree that all of this is based on perception. If Russia is so
Perception?
powerful, yeah, it's all based on perception. If Russia is so powerful, all right, if Russia is so powerful, why is Russia afraid of little Ukraine? If Russia is such a superpower in terms of its military might and considered a global superpower, why is Russia so inferior in its perception of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO or becoming a member of the European Union?
It's not a
Because
perception. It's real. It's real. The threat on Russia is real. Sometimes threat is not even simply intangible issues like military. It can simply be value system. That's why I've made the argument that France will prefer Ambazonia to be independent than for Ambazonia to form a two-state federation with Cameroon. Because our value system, that of tolerance, compromise, democracy, rule of law, can be very much threatening to Cameroon. So too in South Korea and North Korea. It's not really a military threat, it's a value system threat. So that's why
yeah,
North
okay,
Korea.
Mr. President, even though it's a value system threat, let's consider it a value system threat that the people of Ukraine wants to have and enjoy some of the value systems that exist within established democracies. Do they not have a right?
They have a right, and you see, the world does not work this way. They have a right to make their choices, as a sovereign independent state. If they want to join NATO, it's their right to join NATO. If they want to join the EU, it's their sovereign right to join the EU. Sometimes you have during conflicts, you have states that adopt a neutral stance because sometimes the right that they have undermines the security that they have. We have Switzerland has always adopted that posture. We have within the Scandinavia, the Norway is not part of the EU. You have Sweden is not part of NATO. Finland, that was invaded by Adolf Hitler and invaded by Russia, is not part because they have tried to balance the issue of right and survival. So if we were living in an ideal world where right alone, superseded every other concept, then you wouldn't question that. But we are living in a space that is archaic, is anarchic, as a wall said, and it's dangerous. So sometimes there are certain rights that are really, really dangerous.
And that brings
Mr.
the issue
President,
of
Yeah.
DDC. Just let me interject for a second, and so that I can close this point. That brings into the discussion the issue of the rights of the people of Ukraine to make their own security and economic choices, and also the act of balancing that relationship based on Ukraine's geographic location in terms of its relationship and closeness and proximity to Russia. Isn't that where the 2014, I think the agreement that was drawn up in 2014 to try to secure, to make Ukraine a neutral state between the West and the East? Can that not be achieved? Can Ukraine not have both its economic development, its democracy, and also be the balance of power in terms of security assurance with the Russia?
I'll leave that to the DDC. DDC, you wanna take that?
yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, I
I
think
can take it. I'll let you take it.
even
You know why? You know why? DDC, you know why I say you should take that?
Because I know you're
no,
planning
Because
something for me.
no. DDC has studied I think it's the Minsk agreement, right?
The Minsk agreement,
yes,
yes. The Minsk
Yeah,
agreement.
DDC has studied that Minsk agreement more than myself because he had made a presentation once, which was more detailed than I can make. So I have a a mindset about it. But DDC, I'll defer that to you.
So I'm humbled to answer. I think that the whole issue, like the president have said, boils down to not really tangible threats that people can point to, like military threats. That is the same like with us where I live. I am a Chinese national. Our Chinese government also will want certain type of political system around her borders, because politics do influence the stability of political system that have provided a lot of welfare and well-being to the people of China and Russia. I have a new appreciation for what is going on in China than before I came to Hong Kong. The Russian people also, they live in their own political system called the oligarchy. It's not something we are used to or familiar with or something we have learned much about, but they want to protect that system. And Vladimir Putin is quite popular, and the people in Russia count on him for their security and their economic progress. The Americans have the democratic system, and they hold it jealously. They don't want it to be compromised by communist countries or communist or socialist countries like Venezuela. So that politics is going on around the world, and it is really real. And even in Africa, most African states are still not yet quite developed or involved in such political debates or influence. That's why in the United States, in the United Nations, when African leaders speak, most of those European countries are not interested in what we have to say. But due to this war going on, Africa has had a voice, with the Kenyan government having a central role to reinforce what they fought for in 1939 for the United Nations. You remember Charles de Gaulle had a huge campaign in French Africa that they recruited thousands and thousands, over 300,000 Africans were recruited to fight to liberate Europe. Before the coming of the Second World War, the war had the Berlin Conference, where they legalized imperialism. Countries thought that they could go and colonize countries that were not governed by contemporary government and give them political system, and it was acceptable until it was done to Europe when Germany decided to invade Poland. So they stopped it. They stopped it. You had the campaign of Churchill, the Americans. They said, let's fight for an idea for the United Nations Charter, where every country's sovereignty will be respected, territorial integrity will be respected. And for a while, we have enjoyed this political framework, this security framework of the United Nations. And we of the Southern Cameroon, we hold true to that value, and we expect this thing to apply to us. When our parents, we quote the United Nations Charter for our independence, our right of self-determination, but nobody cares. You go through across Africa, when Congo had its independence, they undermine it by creating problem with the Katanga region. These things have been going on, and we have been suffering. And now we have a voice in with Zelensky, who addressed the Security Council and says that the United Nations Charter have become useless if it cannot protect the sovereignty of Ukraine or the sovereignty of Southern Cameroon. And he he talked about Africa, sovereignty in Africa. If they don't respect sovereignty, America can influence other countries, replace presidents, refuse for Venezuela to choose her own path. America even wants China to change. And all these things have made us to be in a crossroad where the whole security infrastructure internationally is being questioned. And God forbid it changes. Donald Trump wanted to do away with the United Nations. And look at what has come to Ukraine, and everybody suddenly realized that we are in a global village. Look at the people being killed in Ukraine. We all plead for them. We all cry for them. But for goodness sake, 30,000 Ambazonians have been slaughtered by Pobia in the name of protecting one Cameroon, a country that was forged based on illegality given the United Nations. So, Mr. President, I want to throw it back to you. that have the blood of the Africans who fought for this idea to protect sovereignty, territorial integrity, have those blood gone in vain? Are we in the crossroad where the war may emerge in a system that can say, let's go back to pre 1939 to the Berlin Conference, where countries have the right to intervene in other countries and take them over, like Russia is doing, and very soon Cameroon, Bakassi, Nigeria want to take back Bakassi, and the Europeans want to come back and take over Africa. So, are we going backward as a human race, or do you think there is some light in the future given the war in Ukraine and the United Nations is powerless?
We have never gone forward. We've never gone forward. The way the world is structured is to guarantee the survival and interests of the powerful. And for example, you see the United Nations, you ask yourself, what level of power do peripheral countries have in the United Nations? Because if anything is determined by a veto power vote at the Security Council, what level of power do we really have? One of the things that the United Nations has done is to create a body of principles and rules that exist only in paper. Even human rights principles exist only in paper. If you look at what I call the democratic index, you realize that many more countries are becoming more undemocratic. If you look at the violation of human rights, you would see that many more states have signed up to international human rights treaty, but impunity has become so normative that the world has been unable to do anything about it. Secondly, you're talking about Ukraine, and so we talk about 30,000 people killed in Ambazonia, and the world is shouting about Ukraine. Realize that most of the people also shouting about Ukraine are those who have vested interest in Ukraine. Ukraine neighbors too about their own survival. They are speaking because they are seeing refugee flows. But look at our own situation. If our own neighbors who are blacks like us, who have been victims of colonialism like us, are instead going to arraign our people and deport them in Solar Republic. So why would you sit down and blame the United States or blame the United Kingdom for not speaking about our own situation? When even if they want to speak about it, there is this notion of blackism and black man, the West is intervening into our space. The world is a complex space. All international institutions were designed to protect the interests of the powerful. IMF has always been controlled by the Europeans. Directors of IMF have always been Europeans. The presidents of the World Bank have always been Americans. And the United Nations has always been controlled by 5 countries since its inception. So you are referring to institutions that do not even reflect your own existence. And you are mourning about a certain international world order that has never benefited you. So what we can only do is to provide these analyses and education and information so that our people become less victims of international power play and focus on how to drive a different international narrative, building an international world order, that which is based on what I call localization rather than globalization. So the United Nations is not for you, it's not for me, has said even nothing concerning Ukraine. It was in Rwanda when 1 million people were butchered. is that sat by and looked at genocide being committed in Myanmar. He was powerless in Srebrenica massacre. It has been a toothless bulldog in every massacre, every violation of the international world order. It has been instrumentalized either by the United States or the China-Russia alliance or by the United States-European alliance. We have been, what I call puppets. We have been a disgrace as a continent. We have been what I call onlookers to the unraveling of the system. The unraveling of the system is good for us. The creation of a new world order where states are truly independent. I'm not talking about political independence simply dish out there where they are what they call economic pacts that undermine economic independence. I'm talking about true independence that gives you the right to explore, exploit, and manage your own resources and decide where you wanna ship cocoa, whether you wanna turn cocoa into chocolate in your homeland or turn coffee into real coffee in your homeland and sell the finished product. Where if you do that, France cannot simply hem on you. Where if you elect a president that France doesn't like, it will not institute rebellion or overthrow those presidents or murder those presidents. Is that the international world order that we're reminiscent of?
Unfortunately, no. And
And
we are
this
asking our
NDDC, this is where all of this, all what's happening in Ukraine, all what's happening between the West and the East, this is where the narrative of our liberation struggle has been a focus, not to count so much on the world to intervene. The only reason they will intervene, as the analysis have pointed out, is to make sure that there is a maintenance of the status quo. Their intervention will be how do they maintain the current benefits, the current economic, political stability benefits that come from Ambazonia in relationship with Cameroon. And that's why the strategy of our liberation has been how much impact the Ambazonian people can have on the current Cameroon system in order to tilt the leverage of interest to the Ambazonian people. The same, we are talking about what's happening between Russia and all of this. The West is pouring billions of dollars. The Canadian government is about to put another $800 million and tanks into Ukraine. To do what? To maintain a certain interest that they will gain from Ukraine. The US has pumped 1.3 billion. They're about to put another $800 million in order to secure a certain type of interest. The interest for our people, it's not going to come from somewhere else. The world has been structured through certain lines, certain divisions. The interest on our people is going to come from what we do. The good news is the discussion in terms of the Russian-Ukraine war has brought the questions of territorial integrity and sovereignty into the limelight of the United Nations. This is the only benefit Ambazonia can get. Because now we can use the same argument. We can use that same argument for Ukraine, for Ambazonia. This is the benefit for Ambazonia. And this is the case we all have to make. This is the only reason it concerns us. This is the only reason we can put it on their faces. The only reason, the primary reason the US granted TPS to Ambazonians and Cameroonians. It's not so much of...
Did the US grant TPS to Cameroon?
Well, Mr. President,
yes,
right
of
now,
course.
No.
Yes.
I've been listening to this for so. The United States did not grant TPS to Cameroonians. It granted. I listened to the DDC's argument Perfect. But the United States did not grant TPS to Cameroon. It granted TPS to Ambazonia. It didn't just have the guts. It did not just have the guts to call it Ambazonia. And if you look at the where has the Boko Haram really made an impact? It's in Nigeria, right?
Yeah, but Mr. President,
Yes.
this is the argument we are saying. You see, this is the masking. This is the masking of the international
This
system,
is
right?
wait, PS, wait. I want to talk when we get to TPS. I will tell you people why it's good news. It's such a sweet
We're
news.
already on TPS. Go
We
ahead.
are
We have
TPS.
Yes,
yes,
we
Are
are
we
we
at
have
there.
15
TPS?
more minutes.
Are we at TPS?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Go
we are
ahead. Right
TPS.
on.
Okay. Let me open TPS. The United States did not grant TPS to Cameroonians. Cameroonians have always benefited from Ambazonian struggle. We died for democracy for them to benefit. We fought for universities. They had more universities than we had. We fought for what they call parliamentary elections. They benefited. And Ambazonians have always shed their blood for these people to benefit. The United States granted TPS to Ambazonians and not Cameroonians. The lack of political courage and what I call that it is not timely yet for the US to go down that description, but they are on their way there. So nobody should ever make that mistake. Cameroonians should keep benefiting from us shedding our blood. They should go and do whatever. But Boko Haram has created more impact in Niger and in Nigeria. So if the US wants to use the argument of Boko Haram, it should grant TPS to Nigerians.
To be fair, I'm mindful of the Cameroon military propaganda that is out there, because they will just have, you have just given Konyam Titus a very good segment there where he will come and quote that text that says that Cameroon, and then say that we are talking different things. Just to be clear, the president is saying that the interest for TBS this time is due to Ambazonian. The appeal from the US Congress, the appeal for Ambazonians who are Americans, who are in the Ambazonian Governing Council mission in the United States, that plays a very good part there. The CDN and all those people who were engaged in this diplomacy. It was granted because of Ambazonia, but the text says that it is granted for Cameroonians. So all those who are in Cameroon, including let me say Cameroons, including Ambazonia, legally speaking, it was granted for all of them. But we know that it is because of Ambazonia. That is what you mean, Mr. President. I hope so.
What I mean is that Cameroonians should not benefit from the TPS because it was not granted to them. And what I also mean is that the United States should become more bold and clear about its ongoing policy with respect to Ambazonia. But the TPS is not simply a human rights instrument, it's a political statement. Most considerations for issues of self-determination begins with a systematic violation of the right of a people to exist, and before it moves to the realm of political consideration. And so, what you should see about the TPS are the debates that were public and the debates that were private, debates that expose the reality about the conflict, educated senators, congresspeople, and US policymakers. And for the United States to have been bold to grant the TPS to Ambazonia was also being bold to send a statement to Cameroon that we now officially, through this policy, recognize that the Amazonian people are being persecuted because of their nationality, consistent with the definition of a refugee as defined by the 51 Convention and the 67 protocol. So it's an it's a human right protective instrument. It's also a political statement. It's a recognition of Ambazonia. The recognition of statehood, independence, it comes in different stages. Recognition of conflict, recognition of the justification of a war, and recognition of the right of that people, recognition of that people, and then you move to the final stage where it is when these rights cannot be protected within the political space that it has existed before due to the unwillingness of that state or its actions in the occupied state, then it moves to the stage of recognition of the independence of that state. So this is good. And why is it also good? Last point. In our strategy for liberation, and I cue from what the PS has raised about Ukraine and our own strategy. Our strategy for liberation has been unique all through history. There is no other example in history that is similar to ours. We came to the conclusion that if we do not make this conflict an international one, we do not make the ideas of the conflict a universal idea acceptable as norm within the international system, right to exist, territorial integrity, sovereignty, and we will lose the argument. It will simply be defined by the enemy as, oh, some people want to create a new state. And so we have been so successful in internationalizing our struggle that parliamentarians, MEPs in the EU, MPs in the UK, senators and congresspeople in France, in Germany, it is for 8 million obscure Ambazonians who have been oppressed for more than 123 years, have had virtually no representation internationally, no lobbying groups being able to speak for us, no seasoned diplomats being able to speak for us, that are citizens in their majority out here mobilizing, campaigning, persuading, and reshaping ideas, have been able to gain this international recognition is a slap on the face of La Republique, and we should applaud ourselves for that.
So, Mr. President, let me ask you, what is the, we now know some of the reasons behind the TPS. Symbolically, what message does the TPS send to the BR regime?
One of the biggest fear of the BR regime, and it's a fear consistent with the fear of every sovereign state in the world when it comes to a conflict. The world operates on two principles, two parallel principles. One is international and one is domestic. And domestic has precedence over international. It means international affairs are dealt with at the domestic level by the state because it has a defined territory, it has an administration, it has a government and stuff. And the concept of sovereignty, which is based on the Westphalian notion of a sovereign state, is very critical in terms of independence of state action, and state policy. And so when there is a conflict inside, all states try as much as possible to make that conflict internal for the protection of their sovereignty, for the protection of their methods, because once it is internationalized, you are exposed, your methods become subject to international scrutiny on either international humanitarian law or international human rights law. So Cameroon has struggled from the beginning to make these an internal issue. The message the TPS sends to Cameroon, and before I get to that, that's why Cameroon's commitment to any negotiation has been a bit fragile, because it knows if it does that, it transfers sovereignty of adjudicating on a key issue like what it perceives as territorial integrity to an international neutral body, and the outcome is always going to go against sovereign states. So the message this sends to Cameroon is that, hey, this is no longer a domestic matter. this is no longer an issue of Northwest and Southwest, part of an integral part of your country. It's about the people, as recognized through the 2006 Banjul outcome, and now certified by also the TPS. And that's why my argument is the TPS is for Ambazonia, and we urge the United States to muster more political courage. It is making that step in the right direction. It also sends a message to Cameroon that there is persecution. It also sends a message not only to Cameroon, and that's what I have advised our Human Rights Department to quantify or to catalog and send to all other countries. Anytime a state use human rights instruments to develop a policy that we cannot send back Ambazonians into Ambazonia because of the fear or the existence of persecution, that policy becomes universal in its application. It can be invoked in any other court of law, in any other asylum case, anywhere as a reference. So this TPS is not only for Ambazonians resident in the United States, it's for Ambazonians resident all over the world, including even in Biafra land.
So basically, Mr. President, basically the TPS now sets an international precedent for Ambazonians seeking protection across the globe, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
And for the next 18 months, it is going to be as part of the briefing of the President of the United States as a priority issue for them to deliberate on how to solve it. So they have 18 months to solve it. It has now come to their table. And Mr. President, during the period of Madeleine Albright, Godudinka successfully established a relationship with the State Department where they recommended that the International Criminal Court should adjudicate about the conflict of sovereign power over our territory. Now with the TPS, what do you expect from the United States now that this issue have become a domestic interest to be resolved by the United States government?
DDC, Mr. President, before you answer that question, DDC, let us add another layer to that question. How would the Governing Council of Ambazonia, Mr. President, use the TPS as an open policy to engage the United States more practically? We have 18 months. Either the Cameroon government succeeds to normalize things on the ground, or the Ambazonian people will be wise enough to up the game within the next 18 months, because the US has given a measuring time frame for normalization. Either things go towards Cameroon or things go towards Ambazonia. How would the Governing Council of Ambazonia and the consensus leadership you are building, how would they use the US granting of the TPS to Southern Cameroonians and Ambazonians? How would they use this as a tool of diplomatic direct engagement with the United States and other member states of within the international system?
There are three ways to go around this. First is from the human rights perspective. The TPS, as I said earlier, gives an opportunity for our diplomats to reach out to other countries to ensure that this is adopted by other countries. The DDC has raised another issue, which is about POTO's briefing about the situation and whether there will be a renewal of the TPS or not. I would opine on that. So the first layer is to ensure that Ambazonians in their majority benefit from this protection, and we hope that there will be Ambazonians who are going to benefit from this, will recognize the sacrifices made by so many to have made this possible. Because we have a long history of Ambazonians benefiting from the struggles of others, getting protection, and then don't want to be political. So each Ambazonia who is going to benefit from this must recognize the sacrifices of the General Ivo, the Amigos, and the others. So our institutions, the AGOC, its first agenda is to ensure that we make this recognition universal and use it also for our struggle to resettle Amazonians who are either in ground one or in ground two. That's the first thing. The second is the policy aspect of it, that we use this particular policy to gain inroads into other capitals, not only for the purpose of human rights protection, but for making sure that the underlying reasons that informed the TPS are dealt with. Because it's a recognition of a crisis. It's a recognition of a conflict. It's a recognition of an ongoing war and a system of impunity that exists. And it is very important that different countries take these TPS and see it as not only providing sanctuary to those who have escaped and are resident, but to ask themselves why are people escaping and what can they do? And this will still be part of our diplomatic, what I call direct diplomatic strategy. The third aspect, the third and last aspect, which is with respect to renewal of TPS, whether the pendulum swings towards La Republique or the pendulum swings towards Ambazonia. This might have a minimal effect. Ambazonians are determined to end the colonization of their country, and they see this as a recognition. Our resistance will go up, come down, based on how we decide to commit and invest. But this must renew the commitment of our people to their struggle, because such a high recognition is also an individual recognition for the contribution that each Ambazonian has made in altering the political destiny of our people. And with respect to what the DDC asked, now, to be very honest with you, I have enormous respect for Pa Goji Dinka, and I'm also an international legal scholar, so I'm not sure that some of the premise that has been made, it's the same with the issue of Biafra, where you hear the elite lawyer from Mazi saying they're taking Nigeria to the ICC based on the rendition of Mazi. It doesn't meet the minimum threshold. Can the ICJ adjudicate the issue of the sovereignty of Amazonia? Yes, it can. It can, if we gonna use international legal experts and do a lot of lobbying. Can the ICC adjudicate, the systematic violation of the statutes of the ICC in terms of war crimes, crimes against humanity? Yes. So we will continue to pursue this angle, but it's an uphill climb. But we are sure that if we can get POTUS, the State Department, Homeland Security, to be able to grant TPS, we'll be able one day to push the agenda of criminal liability of Cameroon in Ambazonia and its violation of international law at the ICJ too.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President. We have very few more minutes. Now let's dive into the last topic, which is the Russian-Cameroon military accord. DDC, take over.
Since 2015, the Cameroon state had engaged in conversation, very high conversation, to have military alliance with the Russian Federation. A lot of experts thought that alliance was a means to lure the Russians to guarantee certain investment that Cameroon couldn't have from her partners in the West. And we are now almost 10 years after that period, Cameroon in the middle of a war that the United Nations have voted as an invasion into a sovereign state, have signed a military accord with Russia. As they say back home, when God wants to destroy a nation, he makes the leader to make big mistake. Ambassador Thibaut Nagy, the former Secretary of State for African Affairs, has said that this is good for Ambazonia. Mr. President, we are all very, very happy to find Paul Biya losing his shield. We know that the French government have worked so hard to shield Cameroon in the United Nations Security Council when the British brought up conversation about the crisis. We know that the TPS was prevented from being signed by Pontus due to a lot of objection from their French partners. Now the French could not get the Cameroon state to vote with them against the Russian war in Ukraine. Mr. Paul Biya and his Bulu Beti clique taking this decision to join Russia at this critical moment. How do you think it will affect Cameroon's shield diplomatically? Do you think this is going to be a turning point where the Americans will say, France, you have to let go of this mad king. We have to deal with this man for the criminal he is. This is the Hitler of Africa. You cannot continue to shield somebody that poked us in our eye. What this guy is going to do in Ambazonia tomorrow with Russia, God forbid, we become the new Chechnya in Africa. What do you say, Mr. President?
A couple of things. First, the accord is not driven by the conflict in Ambazonia, and I would like Ambazonians to be aware of this. That this was something in the woodworks, as you see, as far back as 2015 or 14. So it is not informed by the conflict. Somehow it is also because I think the cabinet of Cameroon had not wanted to okay it for a while, probably due to pressure from the French. And so by going now to okay it in the midst of this international row is a clear-cut statement on the pivot of Cameroon. It would have been dangerous for Ambazonia if our struggle was to unseat or overthrow the regime in Yaoundé. It would have been very dangerous because the Russians have a direct intervention military strategy. So if they want to save an ally, they really do it. You know, if Ukraine was a Russian proxy state, they would have been more proactive than the Americans. So Russia is not stupid. And as I said in my initial reaction, Russia's involvement in conflict is strategic in nature. It's rarely seen that Russians would go support a state simply because it is fighting against separatists. It did that in former Yugoslavia, but it didn't work out well. And it did that because former Yugoslavia was part of the Russian axis. So this accord is not good for Cameroon, but it's not also bad for Cameroon depending on how Ambazonia functions. The Americans will not see this accord and say, okay, it's time to pull the plug on Cameroon because it has consequences. If the Russians take over Cameroon, it has implications on France's influence in Central Africa, in Chad, and other places. It sets a bad precedent for them. So the West is going to avoid, a precedent that will have far-reaching repercussions. The only way this accord is going to work well for us and for the West is when Ambazonia ups its game. When Ambazonia ups its game, this accord will not save La République from Ambazonia. It might keep Biya acolytes in power. For example, Biya's son or whosoever might replace Biya might be supported by the Russians against the Northeast axis or against any other axis that might be emerging to fight for power. But it will not undermine Ambazonia's drive towards independence. The Russians will not support Cameroon against Ambazonia. There is no precedence in that. It doesn't work for the Russian interest either. So Ambazonia has a take-home here. This slap on the face of France, slap on the face of the United States, should give Ambazonians the opportunity to redouble their effort on the ground and shift the political equilibrium in their favor so that we can give justification to either the Americans or the French to take far-reaching steps to force Cameroon's hands either on the table or to charge key elements of the Cameroon regime for the crimes that they are committing in Ambazonia. The instruments that the West usually use are international criminal law instruments, charging people for crimes against humanity, banning them from travel, confiscating their assets. And I think this is an opportunity for Ambazonians to also factor this in its own direct diplomatic push to make sure that assets of La Republique persons are seized, international travels are banned, and then Cameroon is made a pariah at the level of the international system, being thrown out of the Human Rights Council, and making Cameroon, support for IMF or World Bank loan extremely very difficult. It will give us a huge leverage going forward.
Mr. Right. President, a security analyst called Michael Alobede, who writes for TV Arise in Nigeria, he made some comments in some newspapers in Nigeria and in Ghana that there have been agitation by some Nigerian top officials and some officials within the ECOWAS who have been concerned about Russian mercenaries operating within West Africa regarding this issue, and they have indication that they have raised some protests to the Cameroon state. How do you think this will benefit Ambazonia in terms of support or sympathy from the ECOWAS, which we're part of as part of when we're jointly governed with Nigeria? We're part of the West African bloc. Do you think this also have a potential to create avenue, since the ECOWAS had given statement after the Ukrainian war in regards to Ambazonian conflict, calling us by our name, the Southern Cameroons? Do you think this also have a potential to have backlash of Cameroon, its collaboration with Nigeria, and also sympathy for Ambazonia from ECOWAS?
Yes. The ECOWAS bloc is caught in the middle. One, it has the various constituent countries within ECOWAS have domestic agitations, where they are also afraid that Russian interests in using its own outsourcing security apparatus might undermine state stability. And so for a state like Cameroon to become engaged with Russia is a threat. It's a threat to their own national security and sovereignty. On the other hand, moving too fast towards Ambazonia also has the potential of igniting different peoples within their own states that are seeking the right to self-determination, to give them, a new hope that if they can basically support Ambazonia, and then they also have the right to external self-determination. So the ECOWAS is caught in the middle here. But ECOWAS has always been an opportunity for Ambazonia because of the conflict between West Africa and Central Africa. For West Africa has always seen Central Africa as the gateway for France's new colonial policies within the continent. And West Africa has had some level of political independence in making decisions, whether on monetary issues or trade and stuff. And they've realized that bringing Central Africa has always been a problem. So the Amazonian question within the ambit of Central Africa is of interest to West Africa. And if we had made more inroads within the bloc of ECOWAS, it will give us an advantage. But I can assure you that this accord with France, with Russia, we need to exploit it, and we are going to exploit it, and it's going to work. It's going to work for us.
All right, we have come to the end of our program. We have very limited time. Unfortunately, we have very limited time. So, DDC Kapo, you want to go ahead and give your closing remarks, and then the president will close the program with his closing remarks and maybe a message to the Ambazonian people and the international community.
Yes, our country people, them, we una dey watch we for ground zero for all our mami the way una run up una house for open una television for watch ACN for hear how we Dr. Cho Ayaba go can talk for we today for this very good program where they call am the interview. Na program where we really try for bring war topic them for una for bring engage una for very deep things them as it relate for Ambazonia today. We'll be very happy how the president for the governing council, the leader for this war for Ambazonia, he don't take time for can she done with me and the massa press secretary for the office. May we interview in a very wonderful thing. We will continue for begin take small segment them. We will talk and for that British people them Queenie language for bring and down for una for inside our daily podcast. So we will begin listen for podcasts. Una follow our main channel and also for thank the president of the governing council. How don't take time for explain with these things them and for engage our public. The thing we would not suffer for Africa, and I say we always focus for listen for BBC, CNN, and only white man their own perspective about things the way they happen for the war, and ACN it try to engage our community also with international issue them where they also affect we because we stay in a for global village. I go want for take this opportunity for appeal for the president for the governing council. Me also talk for our country people where they listen we for pidgin. If he gets on last statement for talk for them, me them also understand which way this thing where America ran game for Ambazonia them. It will help them in a very brief way. And this war for Ukraine, how it help we too for diplomacy and the document where Pobia go sign, Cameroon go sign and Russia. Also, if it makes some short statement for our country people them, and then that will be it from this end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DDC. Mr. President, you have the closing remarks.
Thanks a lot, DDC, for staying up late and for your service to Ambazonia. Thank you very much. On a daily basis, you are doing podcasts. You have been very successful in anti-kidnapping activities, successfully reduce kidnapping for ransom on the ground. And I encourage you to continuously work hard despite the difficulties and the challenges to make sure that our population is protected, that the bad actors who are exploiting our war of liberation are taken off the streets. You have the support of our population. And also thank you for the education that you provide on a daily basis, reporting the massacres that the enemy is committing and documenting them for our Human Rights Department to be able to use them not only to bring, to hold those responsible accountable, but to make sure that the victims and their families will receive justice in the future. I also want to thank my press secretary for the wonderful job that you've been doing to make sure that Amazonians have a positive orientation of their struggle. They understand the difficulties that they face and the solutions that we are presenting to them. You've been a statesman speaking on behalf of my office and representing leadership in such a fine way. And both of you have been an example of Amazonians that have maintained the momentum, have been able to expose a lot of bad happenings within our struggle. I also want to thank our people for their resilience and their sacrifices and to ask them to sacrifice more. I call on Amazonians in Amazonia to ensure that this struggle is not left in the hands of our forces. If there is any lesson we've learned from other resistance, including that in Ukraine, is the collective responsibility of the people to stop the tanks and to ensure that they can guarantee the safety of their frontline fighters. I also ask our citizens who are above the age of 18 to enroll in our forces and to present themselves in the battlefield in the defense of our territorial integrity and our independence. The issue in Ukraine has brought to the fore the importance of territorial integrity and sovereignty, and that its challenge has always led to a challenge to international peace and security. That is exactly the argument we made before, that the world has a choice to make. Pivot towards Cameroon and lack of predictability insecurity, corruption, torture, and impunity as a form of policy, or pivot towards Ambazonia that guarantees stability in the Gulf of Guinea, international transaction, predictability, and hope. And I think with the TPS, the world is making its decision that is pivoting towards Ambazonia. With all the resolutions and reports from governments and their parliaments, the world has said to Ambazonians, we see you, we hear you, we recognize you. It is left now to us, the Ambazonian people, to take this struggle to its logical conclusion. To our people in the diaspora, the past 5 years have been trying. The past 5 years have been full of a lot of politics, which has been enjoyable, which has, benefited Ambazonians in terms of political pluralism, in understanding different shades of ideas and opinion. I think after 5 years of politicizing the struggle, it is now important for Ambazonians to rally behind the leadership of the Ambazonian Governing Council. And you know that independence is assured. And as I have promised before, we will win as a people. At the period of transition, we will come together and set up a transitional authority that will bring together our defense forces, it will bring together our social media activists, it will bring together political leaders to institute a transitional process that elects transitional leadership to take us to the period of full independence. And that is the part I've been pursuing in the past few months, ensuring that I have bilateral meetings, reaching out to people